This video is not intended to be a full post-fight reaction to James Degale versus Caleb Truax. I've only been able to watch 10 rounds of the fight, and I did that when I was running on a treadmill, which is clearly not ideal situation for watching a fight ahead of coming up with some detailed analysis. It's also not ideal to talk about a 12-round fight when you've only seen 10 rounds. So I'm going to talk about general themes as opposed to a complete overview of the fight. For what it's worth, based on the 10 rounds I saw, I would say that this was a very, very, very competitive matchup that could quite easily have gone either way. And based on the 10 rounds of action I saw, I couldn't say with any degree of confidence that I had one man clearly ahead. 5-5, 6-4 either way, I could have accepted. I thought Caleb Truax was once again putting a lot of pressure on James Degale. I thought James Degale was once again uncomfortable under the amount of pressure Caleb Truax was applying. I did think there were times in the fight that Caleb Truax closed the range almost too much, and it came sort of phone booth style wrestling as opposed to clinical inside work. Degale, largely taking up the mantle of the back foot boxer, had periods of effectiveness when he was jabbing and maybe landing the higher quality of work from distance. But I felt throughout the course of the fight, based on what I saw, the jab was poor. And I also thought his defensive construct was very, very easily broken by Caleb Truax throughout spells of the fight. There were real moments where Caleb Truax was walking Degale down, and Degale would try and put up some sort of defence. He'd stick an arm out, he'd try and find an angle, and Caleb Truax would almost just go straight through it, and get straight on the inside. So I thought it was a imperfect performance from both men, and I thought they appeared to be a relatively similar level to one another. Couldn't complain with either man winning, couldn't complain with it being a draw. My gut instinct is I am surprised that one of the judges has it wide for Degale, although the two judges that had it narrowly for Degale, I couldn't say it was a robbery, basically. That's my in-brief analysis. James Degale is going to be a hard guy to sum up. It's a hard guy to sum up, because if you look at the biggest fights of James Degale's career, the George Groves fight, he narrowly lost. The Badou Jack fight, he narrowly drew. That Andre Durrell fight was a tight fight. And looking back on it with the benefit of hindsight, how good was Andre Durrell? We've seen Andre Durrell's career absolutely collapse subsequently. So he's a tough guy to sum up. And in between that, you've got very, very close fights with an aging Lucian Bute, a Porky Medina who was dispatched by David Benavidez, easily. I mean, prior to the Andre Durrell fight, there were wins over guys. Was it Brandon Gonzalez, Marco Antonio Periban? But again, very, very hard to work out what level of operator that was up against. I was one of those guys, when he beat Periban, when he beat Gonzalez, when he beat Durrell, I was one of those guys happy to anoint James Degale as a truly elite, world-class talent. Looking back on it now, I'm unclear. I'm unclear how good James Degale was. Was James Degale a very, 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 very good elite fighter who got in too many wars and is now declined? Or is he a guy who was well matched against Gonzalez, was well matched against Periban, was well matched against the Durrell on the decline? I'm not so sure, because the performances against Porky Medina, Lucian Bute, Caleb Truax twice are very, very disappointing. And that Badou Jack fight, that's another fight where, to be fair, he did well in the first half, but obviously was pretty beaten up in the second half of that fight. So Degale, a hard guy to work out. When looking back on his career, it will be very, very hard to summarise where he's at. In terms of Degale in the next year or so, I've got to say, over the course of 24 rounds, he has not looked like the better man than Caleb Truax. They have looked a very, very similar level over 24 rounds. I haven't seen Caleb Truax hurt by Degale. I haven't seen Caleb Truax outboxed by Degale. And my belief is not that Caleb Truax has become a world beater overnight. My belief is more that unfortunately we're seeing frailty in the Degale game that means he's currently operating at around Caleb Truax level. Could that be that James Degale has declined and is approaching becoming a shot fighter who's been in too many wars? Very possibly. Could it be that James Degale was never quite the elite fighter that many people like myself thought he was? Very possibly. Most likely it's somewhere between the two. Most likely he's a fighter who wasn't quite as great as we thought he was, combined with a fighter who unfortunately is starting to witness some decline in his career. That's my take for what it is. I've got to say, 2-3 years ago, I was talking about Degale Eubank, and I was saying I'd make Degale a huge favourite in that fight. Now, I know Chris Eubank Jr. is a fighter whose stock is currently at an all-time low after the nature of his defeat to George Groves. But what I would say is the Chris Eubank Jr. we know would build pressure for me better than Caleb Truax and would land more devastating punches than Caleb Truax on the inside. I know Chris Eubank Jr. is a guy who's been overhyped and who's been overrated himself perhaps in the past. But based on the success Caleb Truax had against James Degale, very, very hard to see Degale beating Chris Eubank Jr. for me. That George Groves rematch, yes, I'd still like to see it from a story perspective, from a WWE perspective, but a lot of the spice has gone out of this. And like a lesser version of Floyd Manny, this isn't the fight it would have been 2 or 3 years ago if it had happened when Degale was at his peak. Now with George Groves putting in improved performances of late, and with Degale's performances showing that he's at a similar level to Caleb Truax, there wouldn't be too many out there rushing to pick James Degale to beat the Saint in that matchup. Should James Degale retire? That's a question for him and him alone. If I were him, I'd be inclined maybe to take one more big money matchup, be that a Eubank, be that a Groves. Is there one more massive payday in James Degale's career, another 7-figure payday? On balance, there probably is, especially now he's a world champion again. That unification with George Groves. Don't expect him to be getting a 50-50 split with George Groves these days after all the stuff that's gone on with splits between those two in the past. But on balance, on balance, is that a fight that could still be made? Is it a fight that could still be sold? Yes. I mean, not to the extent that it could have been sold in the past, but it's still, a fight that would generate interest in the UK. Can I see James Degale beating a top name anymore? Be that at 168, be that at 175? Absolutely not. Could I pick Degale to beat a George Groves, a Chris Eubank Jr., a Badu Jack? Not. I couldn't. Not based on what we've seen in the ring in the last 2 fights, and it's sad because I've been a huge James Degale fan over the years, but his performances at the minute are just not cutting the mustard. He's always had those fatal flaws in his game, that slight laziness to the style, the propensity to sit on the ropes, and it's come home to roost. And against a guy like Caleb Truax, who's basic but built pressure well and done some relatively smart things against him, for me, he's completely unravelled. Anyway, that's an 8.5 minute rant. Probably hasn't been the best video that I'm going to record all year on the channel, but I'm pushed for time. A lot of people were asking me for a reaction to the fight, so I wanted to get something uploaded. Yes, Degale retains his belt, or wins his belt back, should I say. Yes, credit to him for doing that. No, I couldn't say it was a robbery that he beat Caleb Truax, but the abiding thought that I'm left with is that it was a performance from Degale that showed he was at a very, very similar level to Caleb Truax. There is a whisker, a wafer between the two of them. Maybe Degale just about did enough, but is that good enough against a guy like Caleb Truax? Wouldn't we be expecting a bigger margin of victory for a guy once regarded as one of the elite boxers in Great Britain? Sorry if that's negative, but that's my take. I don't think Degale has too much longevity left in the sport. I don't think it would be good for him to have another 2, 3, 4 fights. If I were him, would I be looking at one last payday, one last, send off from the sport? I probably would be. He's still good enough to be in the ring with a George Groves or a Chris Eubank Jr. Could you see him beating one of those guys? It's hard for me. Let me know your thoughts. Am I misreading the situation? You know, is Caleb Truax just a boogeyman type figure for James Degale? And do you believe at his current age he can bounce back to the James Degale of old? Leave me your comments in the section below. If I'm writing off James Degale too quick, I'll be delighted, because you know, Degale is someone I've always supported. He's someone I've always been a fan of, and I'd love to see him come back. But I've lost hope we're going to see that. Let me know your thoughts. If you've enjoyed the video, as always, please hit thumbs up. Please subscribe. Thanks for tuning in.